Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons and love are told. Please don't forget to like this story, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more heart-gripping tales. I had always believed numbers told the truth. My name is Alara Finch, and my job in internal controls at Eastward Dynamics was to ensure that truth stayed intact. For years, I had quietly kept the company safe, cross-checking reports, reconciling discrepancies, and flagging risks before they ever became disasters. It wasn't glamorous, but I knew the weight of responsibility I carried. That belief, my faith in numbers and process, was what led me into a storm I never expected. The first time I noticed something unusual, it seemed almost harmless. A late-night review of expense approvals showed travel costs for a series of trips that didn't align with the calendar records. The trips were signed off by Marcus Hale, our director of finance, and curiously, they were pushed through without the dual approvals normally required under our policy. I thought maybe it was just an oversight. But when I looked closer, I saw the override notes. Executive exception granted. Executive exception. Those words unsettled me. Only the CEO, Victor Rowan, was supposed to grant such an exception, and even then, it had to be documented through a compliance form. But the forms weren't there. Just Marcus's initials and a digital rubber stamp that looked forced into the system. I documented it, flagged it, and sent a short note to Marcus asking for clarification. His reply came 2 hours later, sharp and dismissive. "Thanks, Alara, but these are executive matters. Stay focused on your department." That phrase stuck in my head. Stay focused on your department. It was the first warning sign that the ground beneath me was shifting. Still, I pushed forward. I reviewed the logs over the next few weeks, quietly comparing travel reimbursements, expense reports, and project costs. What I found was a pattern: multiple overrides, all routed through Marcus, and each one bypassing the controls I had spent years building. When I raised the matter again, this time to our compliance committee, the reaction was chilling silence. 2 days later, I was called into Victor's office. Victor was a polished man, silver hair, perfect suit, voice like velvet that could soothe or cut depending on his intent. He leaned back in his chair and gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Alara," he said, "I've been hearing some concerns about your approach. You're diligent, no doubt, but sometimes too much diligence slows the business down. We need partners in growth, not bottlenecks." I tried to explain calmly that the overrides were unusual, that without proper documentation, the company could be exposed to regulatory risk. But Victor cut me off. "You're a talented professional, but if you want to grow here, you need to stop nitpicking. Trust your colleagues. Trust Marcus. He has my full confidence." That conversation left me shaken. It wasn't just dismissal, it was a warning. I was being told in no uncertain terms to stop digging. But that went against everything I stood for. I couldn't look away from the numbers that didn't add up. Over the next month, I found myself increasingly isolated. My access to certain financial dashboards was revoked for restructuring. My team was reassigned, and I was told to focus on supporting documentation rather than analysis. The work I loved, finding patterns, ensuring integrity, was stripped away piece by piece. And through it all, Marcus made sure to remind me of my supposed shortcomings. In meetings, he'd smirk across the table and say things like, "Well, Alara would probably take 6 months to approve this. She still thinks we're in audit school." The room would chuckle, and I'd feel my credibility evaporate in real time. I noticed how my suggestions no longer made it into minutes. My emails requesting clarification about anomalies went unanswered. I was becoming invisible, erased not by accident but by design. One Friday evening, long after most of the office had cleared out, I sat staring at my computer screen. I had discovered yet another override. This time a massive expense linked to a vendor that didn't exist in our system 6 months ago. The documentation trail was thin, the approval rushed, and once again Marcus's name was on it. I pressed print and held the warm sheets in my hand, knowing I had captured another piece of truth. But I also knew something else. If I confronted them again directly, it would not only be ignored, it would put me in greater danger. That was the night I realized the fight had shifted. I wasn't just up against mistakes or sloppy processes. I was up against people determined to silence me. Victor and Marcus weren't simply bypassing controls, they were rewriting the very rules of the company, and I was standing in their way. The next week proved it. I logged in one morning and found my permissions halved again. Reports I used to access daily were now locked. Even my shared drive folder had been wiped clean. A note from IT read, "Access restructured per executive request."
No explanaschen. No justificaschen.
Just removal. I remember standing at my desk, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. Around me, the office buzzed with casual chatter, people sipping coffee, laughing about weekend plans, oblivious to the quiet war playing out in their systems. I felt utterly alone, watching as everything I had built was stripped away in plain sight. But the thing about being underestimated is that people assume you'll fold. They think if they cut you off, you'll give up, maybe even resign quietly. Victor and Marcus believed they had cornered me, reduced me to a compliance ghost. But what they didn't understand was that I had learned to live in the shadows. Every dismissal, every smirk, every revoked access was fuel. They thought they had erased me. But I was still there, watching, memorizing, and preparing for the moment when truth would no longer be optional. And that moment was coming faster than they realized. I knew if I kept confronting Marcus and Victor head-on, they would bury me completely. They already had the power of position, and I was being painted as paranoid. The only way forward was to build something they couldn't erase. That was the birth of what I secretly called Sunrise Mirror. It wasn't just a folder, it was my quiet rebellion, an off-site archive, hidden in plain sight, where every shred of truth lived beyond their reach. Each night after work, I carried a small external drive home in my bag. I copied approval logs, expense spreadsheets, Slack threads where Marcus casually brushed aside my questions, calendar invites that revealed hidden executive sessions. I documented every rollback of my protocols and every access change that stripped me of oversight. When my drives filled, I upgraded them. When my fear grew, I encrypted them. It was lonely, obsessive work, but each file felt like a candle in the dark, proof that what I had seen was real. The danger grew as Marcus's brazenness escalated. He stopped even pretending to follow protocol. Travel reports were submitted with no receipts. Vendor payments shot into six figures with nothing more than a two-line description. One day I caught him laughing with a junior accountant about how controls are just suggestions if you know the right door. My stomach clenched, but I said nothing. I had learned silence was safer so long as I was recording everything behind the scenes. But I wasn't just copying files. I was building a timeline, a meticulous chain that showed not only the fraud but also the systematic silencing of anyone who questioned it. I wrote detailed notes to myself. March 11, 10:24 a.m. Override executed. Logged by Marcus. Compliance form missing. Victor present in Slack thread at 10:42. Each note became a stitch in the fabric of truth, binding them tighter to their own actions. I remember one particular night, the office empty, when I discovered the deletion of the Q2 compliance report. I had submitted that report 3 days earlier. It contained a summary of flagged anomalies that Marcus had tried to scrub. When I went to retrieve it, the folder was blank. Even the backups had been purged. My hands shook as I realized. They were no longer hiding sloppily. They were willing to erase entire records. But what they didn't know was that I had anticipated it. Before submitting the Q2 report, I had quietly sent a copy to my personal archive, along with a timestamped log showing when it was uploaded to the company system. I backed up both versions, the real one and the one they deleted. That night, as I stared at the empty folder, I whispered to myself, "They don't know I'm still ahead of them." The tension at work grew unbearable. I could feel the eyes on me, the whispers when I walked past. Colleagues who once sought my advice now avoided me. In meetings, Marcus interrupted me with a fake laugh saying, "Let's not overcomplicate this, Alara. We've already reviewed it." Victor would nod approvingly, and I would sit in silence, burning inside but outwardly calm. The erasure was complete. Then came the final blow. One Monday morning, I logged in and found my access denied entirely. My badge no longer opened the door. HR summoned me into a glass conference room where a thin-smiled representative read off a sheet. "Due to strategic realignment, your position has been eliminated effective immediately." Victor appeared briefly on the company livestream later that day, talking about streamlined compliance functions and aligning with business growth. Marcus, smirking in the corner of the feed, added, "Sometimes paranoia can slow innovation. We thank Alara for her service." I sat alone in my apartment that night, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room. My career at Eastward Dynamics was over. They thought they had silenced me. They thought deleting my access meant deleting my truth. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that before my final access was revoked, I had already sent an encrypted email. The recipient, the General Counsel of Eastward Dynamics, blind copied to my personal legal contact. Attached, the full Sunrise Mirror archive up to the very last moment, including the unmodified Q2 compliance report and every supporting document. I pressed send just hours before the lockout. My heart thundered as I watched the progress bar crawl forward, terrified it might fail, terrified they'd intercept it. But it was sent. I closed the lid and whispered, "It's done." For weeks I heard nothing, just silence. I updated my resume, applied to firms who never called back, stared at my dwindling bank account. My former colleagues avoided my texts. My LinkedIn is filled with Victor's smiling updates about new ventures and Marcus's photos at luxury resorts. I felt forgotten, discarded, erased. And then one afternoon everything shifted. An email arrived in my inbox from a government domain, Office of Corporate Oversight Audit Division. The subject line read, "Follow-up. Eastward Dynamics Urgent Documentation Review." My pulse quickened as I opened it. The regulators had launched a spot audit, and Eastward Dynamics had claimed that legacy logs were unavailable. But then the email continued. "We have recently come across an archive forwarded by you to General Counsel. This material appears critical to our ongoing investigation. Please confirm its authenticity." I sat frozen at my desk, realizing the Sunrise Mirror had not just been insurance. It was the key to everything. The storm was no longer brewing in silence. It was about to break wide open. The moment I hit reply to the regulators, I knew there was no turning back. I confirmed the authenticity of every document, every timestamp, every report I had archived in Sunrise Mirror. As I typed, my hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the weight of vindication. They had tried to erase me, but with one email, I had turned their silence into a weapon. Days later, word spread like wildfire. Eastward Dynamics was under investigation. The Office of Corporate Oversight requested an urgent supplemental meeting, and whispers began swirling across industry boards. People who once ignored me suddenly wanted to talk, as if brushing against my truth might cleanse their complicity. I stayed quiet, watching from the outside, waiting for the cracks in their empire to split wide open. The meeting itself became a spectacle. I wasn't in the room, but transcripts and second-hand accounts painted the picture clearly. Victor entered with his usual charm, insisting the company was fully compliant. Marcus, slick and smug, claimed that all anomalies were clerical errors, and that the missing Q2 report never existed. But then the General Counsel, an older man known for his restraint, produced my email. Attached was the unaltered report, the archived logs, the Slack threads, the vendor anomalies. "You'll want to revisit your statement," he told Marcus flatly. "This is a time-stamped record from your own system." And it was provided before Ms. Finch's access was revoked. Silence fell over the room. I imagined Marcus's smirk fading, Victor's polished mask slipping. They had not expected me to survive beyond the walls they locked me out of. Yet here I was, my voice speaking through the documents they thought they had destroyed. The regulators pressed harder. They asked Victor to explain why executive overrides bypassed dual approval chains. He stumbled, talking in circles about flexibility for growth. They asked Marcus why entire logs were purged just days after my flagged anomalies. His excuse, system maintenance, collapsed when confronted with Slack screenshots where he bragged about cleaning the slate. The transcripts said one of the auditors leaned forward and asked, "Were you obstructing compliance, or simply incompetent?" Marcus had no answer. Victor shifted uncomfortably, realizing his empire of charm was unraveling. Within a week, Eastward Dynamics was all over the news. Headlines screamed, "Corporate fraud exposed in sudden audit. CEO and finance director under scrutiny." Former employees began sharing stories of intimidation and manipulation. The stock price plummeted. Investors demanded answers. And the men who mocked me as paranoid suddenly found themselves facing legal counsel, subpoenas, and sleepless nights. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was something quieter, relief. The numbers had spoken. The truth had outlasted the lies. My own life began to shift as well. Calls came in from firms that had once ignored me. Recruiters wanted to know if I was open to new opportunities. But I realized I didn't want to slip back into someone else's hierarchy, waiting for their permission to do the right thing. I wanted control. I wanted freedom. So I built it. From my small apartment, I launched my own compliance advisory firm. I named it ClearPoint Advisory, a reminder that clarity is power. The first weeks were slow. I designed a simple website, drafted service outlines, sent polite but firm pitches to companies terrified of becoming the next Eastward Dynamics. Then the unexpected happened. The Office of Corporate Oversight reached out directly. They wanted me on contract to help them design new internal control frameworks for companies across the sector. Me, the woman labeled a bottleneck, paranoid, too rigid for growth, was now shaping the very standards my enemies had trampled. The first time I walked into their headquarters, badge in hand, I felt the shift in my bones. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was no longer erased. I was the proof that silence could be broken, that truth could survive even when every system tried to bury it. One evening, as I locked up my new office, still small, still modest, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass door. I thought about Victor, with his velvet voice, and Marcus with his smug grin. I thought about the Friday nights I sat alone copying files, terrified of discovery. And I thought about the single moment my archive left my laptop and entered the hands of those who could act on it. One email. That was all it took. One act of quiet defiance. One refusal to let the truth vanish. That was the moment the balance shifted. And standing there, I whispered to myself, they erased me, but I rewrote the ending. Moral lesson. Sometimes revenge doesn't arrive with fire or fury. Sometimes it arrives in patience, in silence, in the quiet faith that truth cannot be permanently buried. My journey taught me that meticulousness, the small habits of documenting, archiving, and refusing to compromise can one day become the loudest weapon. It's not always about confronting power in the open. Often, it's about waiting, holding steady, and letting the evidence speak when the world is ready to hear it. To anyone listening who has ever been silenced, mocked, or erased, remember this. Your diligence is not weakness. Your attention to detail is not paranoia. And when you stand firm in the face of manipulation, you are planting seeds that may one day bloom into justice. I walked away with scars, yes, but also with freedom. My story is a reminder that resilience and preparation can transform even the darkest betrayal into the brightest comeback. So if you're watching this, don't forget. Like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and comment what lesson you've taken from my story. Because one voice, one comment, one email, it can change everything.